Rev it up and welcome to Cars Yeah, show number 2260. Today, a very interesting conversation with a first-time author and a racer who's written a book about the dark side of funding your racing team. Be prepared to be inspired. This should be fun.
This is Cars Yeah, where you'll enjoy interviews with inspiring automotive enthusiasts. Mark Green is here to provide you with a fuel injection of automotive inspiration. So get in, sit down, buckle up, and get ready for a wild ride here on Cars Yeah.
Hello, inspiring automotive enthusiasts, and welcome to Cars Yeah. Today I'm in Northampton in the UK. Seems like I jump across the pond quite a bit lately, which is fine with me. I love my UK guests, with a very special gentleman by the name of Crispian Besley. Crispian, welcome to Cars Yeah. Do you have it in gear, and are you ready to release the clutch?
I am indeed. Nice to talk to you, Mark.
Well, thank you. We're going to have some fun because we're both vintage racers. I'm a retired guy, but you just keep on going, which is pretty cool. But mostly we're going to talk about a very interesting book that you've authored, your first book. But before I give you a proper introduction, what's one little thing that maybe people don't know about you, Crispian?
What's a little thing that people don't know about me? Well, you've already mentioned the fact that it's my first book. There are a lot of things that people don't know about me. My profession, I'm retired now, but I was an investment banker. But before I started my career in the City of London in banking, I raced cars. I was one of these wannabe world champions, and I shared the track with one future world champion, Nigel Mansell.
Oh, wow.
But several other Formula One drivers as well, maybe on your side of the pond. They would be less well known, but they included Kenneth Atchison, Jonathan Palmer, Mike Thackwell, who for a while was the youngest ever Grand Prix starter, and Chico Serra as well. Several F1 drivers.
Yeah.
So I was in that cohort, but clearly never made the grade. So I never raced a period Formula One car, although subsequently in my historic motor racing career, I have raced a Formula One car.
Well, very cool. Well, my hat's off to you, my friend. That is awesome. Those are some spectacular names that you hung around with. Well, the fact that you're still racing and still having fun doing these things is most important. So again, my hat's off to you. Let me give you a proper introduction here. Crispian Besley is the first-time author, as I said, with a lifelong interest in cars and passion for motor racing. Already enthralled by Formula One, his first visit to a motor race, aside from outings to watch stock car racing at Wimbledon Stadium, was to spectate at the 1974 British Grand Prix at Brands Hatch with his father. So that gives him a little bit of a time set here. He's done some racing himself, as he's mentioned, recently enjoyed historic single-seat race cars, including a Cooper F1, as well as a Brabham and Surtees Formula 2 cars. Crispian's main focus has been racing historic Formula Junior, which he has raced all over Europe, in New Zealand, and America in a variety of cars, which include a Gemini, a Lotus, an Osca, Elva and Cooper. Oh my gosh, you're having too much fun. An enthusiast collector of classic cars, he lives in a 16th century manor house that's conveniently close to Silverstone, within easy reach of several other race circuits. Nice placement. Today, he's here to share his book titled Driven to Crime, True Stories of Wrongdoing in Motor Racing, published by our good friends at EVRO Publishing. We'll be back in just a moment to learn more about Crispian racing and this book, but first a word from our sponsors. They keep the petrol in the tanks here, so give them a little love, and we'll be right back. Years ago, when it was time to renew my collector car insurance policy, my carrier's rates went up. Way up, but my usage was the same and I never made a claim. I didn't even have a ticket. So what's with that? So I turned to American Collectors Insurance. Has your collector car insurance recently raised your rates for no good reason? Tired of paying an annual membership fee? Then it's time to look around and call American Collectors Insurance. I shopped around, I asked friends for recommendations, and found a winner that I can trust. And boy, I'm glad I did. I saved hundreds of dollars every year and slept better at night knowing my baby was properly insured. American Collectors Insurance have been protecting vehicles since 1976. They provided me with an agreed value insurance policy backed by their history of taking great care of their clients. What could be better than that? So give them a call and ask for a quote today. 866-ACI-YEAH. That's 866-224-9324. And protect the ones you love like I did with American Collectors Insurance. Classic car insurance designed by collectors for collectors. For several years now, you've heard me talk about Linkage Magazine. I've been a subscriber since the start. Their talented and creative team brings you a spectacular publication and website that shares the automotive passion from a worldwide perspective. Linkage is about driving, restoring, collecting, and first-hand experience at collector car auctions and more. They bring you real-world values plus rational, experienced opinions on the current markets. They cover the automotive world and the people who share our passions. And Linkage Magazine has grown, mailing you 6 issues annually. Join me on this journey with Linkage. They're geared for the automotive life. You can subscribe at linkagemag.com. If you're listening to this program, there's a pretty good chance you believe what I believe, that the collector vehicles we love are more than just a means of getting from one place to the other. They're a part of our culture, our identity, and as a people, they bring us together at vintage races, classic car auctions, and 1,000-mile rallies. That's why I support the RPM Foundation, which exists to ensure that the critical skills necessary to preserve and restore these important vehicles aren't lost to time. RPM stands for Restoration, Preservation, and Mentorship, and their goal is to inspire the next generation of vehicle restoration professionals through its outreach programs. And they include Shop Hop, Off to the Races, the RPM Future Class, and many others. These programs engage talented young people across the country and connect them with mentors and a variety of opportunities in the industry. For more information on how the RPM Foundation is driving the future of collector vehicles skill trade, visit rpm.foundation today. So, Crispian, what a life you've lived. Investment banking in London, the finance capital of the world, really. So you were in the heart of things. But we're talking about cars today. And before we get into this book, which I find fascinating, let's talk a little bit more about what got you into racing. I mentioned attending that race with your dad when you were a kid, but the bug bit you and you didn't let go, did you?
No, I didn't, Mark. I think it started not with racing so much. It just started like a lot of small boys. I collected model cars, and I've sort of gone on collecting them. So I've now got a couple of thousand of them in my office.
Oh my gosh!
And I played with cars, and I played with racing cars. I then got involved with a couple of local friends racing. I don't know what you call them in the US, but soap boxes.
Oh, yes.
So just made literally with sort of out of wood and with, old pram wheels. So that got my taste for speed. As you alluded to, went to watch stock car racing at Wimbledon Stadium. Wimbledon in this country is best known for its tennis. The tennis championships, but there was also a stock car stadium there. And stock cars over here are not what they are with you. It's like banger racing. So racing very old cars around a short sort of quarter-mile shale circuit, as opposed to what we call production car or touring cars over here. And that was just very easily accessible for me because it was I lived in London, I was brought up in London, and it just evolved. I was at school with James Hunt's 2 youngest brothers.
Oh, wow.
James Hunt being the 1976 world champion for those, Formula One world champion for those of you who don't know on your side of the pond. And we then started go-karting, so proper karts together. James's success helped us in our quest for sponsorship. When I left school, my great friend was David Hunt, who sadly died a couple of years ago, very young. But I was a year older than him, so I left school a year before he did. And I traded, unashamedly, Mark, on the Hunt connection to try and get myself sponsorship. My parents were neither willing nor in a position to give me the much-needed funding, so I had to go out myself and find sponsorship. And that's what I did. And I raced in 77 through to 79 sporadically in Formula Ford, having, found the sponsorship and the commercial backing to do it.
Wow. Well, sounds like you got bit by that bug and continued to do it throughout your career. And now in retirement, you're still on the track. And I find that so much fun. And, you listeners, we had a great chat, Crispian and I, before we got on the show here today, talking about the difference between historic racing and vintage racing. Here, of course, in the U.S. seems to be a bit more tame, although I know there's some drivers that can get pretty fast and aggressive. But over there in the UK and Europe, you guys, what I say, you really race these cars, don't you?
Yeah, we definitely do. And I don't know whether that's because people on your side of the pond have a greater sense of self-preservation. I think we all share the passion. I just think, when I raced in the States, as we mentioned before the show started, people are just rather more sensible, perhaps. The passion is there on both sides of the pond. And we do race hard. I think part of the reason for it, without rambling too much, is that, the UK and in Europe as well is a much smaller place than the States, as we all know. And on that basis, I can race if I want to in Europe, probably somewhere in a Formula Junior most weekends of the year.
Wow.
And within, as you said at the top of the show, I live very near Silverstone, but actually I live within 1.5 hours maybe of about half a dozen other circuits, well-known circuits over here.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're and therefore I get to race. I would suggest I race more than most of my American counterparts. And as you know, as a historic racer yourself, Mark, like most sports, the more seat time you have, the better you are.
Yes.
And if you're racing during a 6-month season every other weekend, then you've had a lot more practice than, some of my friends in the States who sometimes have to, cross almost a continent or more than, in our terms, to get from one circuit to another. So the logistics are much more difficult in the US.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And that was always a concern of mine, and just not getting enough seat time. And plus the people you're racing with maybe hadn't been in a car in a year. And so, there was all that. Plus, maybe we have more attorneys over here. There's more litigation you have to worry about as well, which could be part of the problem.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I want to talk about this book because Driven to Crime, True Stories of Wrongdoing in Motor Racing. You've covered basically 66 true stories that cover everything from webs of deceit, numerous crimes, including drug trafficking, corruption, embezzlement, robbery, fraud, murder, money laundering. No doubt we've all heard of some of these stories because they became big newspaper type stories, but can you tell me first and foremost why this part of racing? Because it's kind of the dark side of racing, but it's also very intriguing.
Well, it is intriguing. And the genesis of this goes back to my early days in Formula Ford, where I was trying to get sponsorship. And I became quite good at it because I had to. If I didn't get sponsorship, I couldn't race.
Right.
And it struck me, even as long ago as that, Mark, that there were some people who may be mechanics in a garage, maybe their father's garage, and they work 24/7 to get their car, to buy a car, to get it prepared, to get it on the track. And they had to work really hard to buy a new set of tires. Then there were the trust fund kids who just came from extraordinarily wealthy and well-connected families. Then there were people like me who just went out and hard graft. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a mechanic. I just simply, I couldn't prepare my own cars. I needed money to pay other people to prepare my cars. And then there was another category of people who tended to be a bit older than I was. I was a teenager at the time, who very clearly was sourcing very large amounts of money from somewhere else. And it became clear to me that, where there's, as we all know in motor racing, it's like tearing up $10,000 a time,
Yeah.
It's extraordinarily expensive. It's a very expensive sport. Where there's money, there's crime. So it's always fascinated me from the very early days as to how people paid for their habit. And as you said before the show started, it's an addiction for sure.
Yeah.
I would argue, and I think you and your listeners would argue as well, that it's a healthy addiction. But an addiction's an addiction. It has to be paid for. And even when I stopped racing, semi-professionally, I've always been fascinated in the commercial side of the sport, the main discipline over here. And I'm primarily a single-seater racer, but the main discipline is Formula One. It's always amazed me how people fund their sponsorship deals and where the money's come from. And particularly in the 90s over in Europe and Formula One, there were some very, very dodgy sponsors and team owners. And that's always fascinated me. So that was the starting point. I had the idea of writing the book actually when I was racing in New Zealand in 2017. And I spoke to someone who's become a good friend of mine called Howden Ganley, who's a Kiwi ex-Formula One driver. He raced for BRM, amongst other teams, and many other teams. And he said, we were just chatting over dinner one night, and he said, I talked about the idea, and he said, you've got to do it. So that was the starting point, really. I've got, as you can imagine, I've been involved in the sport for a very long time. I've got a wide network of contacts. A lot of people were very helpful, whether they were journalists, motoring journalists, authors, and competitors. And it sort of grew from there. And when we came in this country, our then Prime Minister Boris Johnson locked us down because of COVID in March 2020. Business people were confined to their homes. My children came home, we tried to work from home. And I thought, well, this is the ideal opportunity to put pen to paper. So I'd already done quite a lot of research. I've got a pretty good knowledge, obviously. I've got a huge library of books. And I used my connections and interviewed a lot of people over the phone. COVID was an advantage in that respect because it meant I wasn't able to travel to see people. So a lot of it was done on the phone, and it grew from there. So
it's interesting because I grew up in La Jolla, California, which is just north of San Diego, a fairly affluent part of the world. And in my young days, I encountered two people that ended up, they may be part of your book. I'm not, well, one of them may be, but one that was funding racing teams, and I used to detail his cars, and I would go over and look at what this guy was doing. And he was an investor or money guy that I think ended up being a money launderer in many ways, kind of a little mini Madoff, if you will. And so, when you see things that look better than they should be, and you kind of go, how are they doing this? Well, in that case, he ended up in prison. Another guy that I did some work for, turns out was building off-road vehicles to race the Baja 500 1000 and then using those to transport illicit items, let's just say, from Mexico back into the U.S. And you look at these guys and say, wow, great business people. They know what they're doing. And then when they let you down and you realize that they're crooks, basically, pretty frustrating. So as we, obviously we don't want to give away the whole book because I want people to buy it, but maybe you can touch on a couple stories briefly that kind of made your eyes go up, because there's everything from great robbery, great train robbery, getaway people to people that murdered people and bankrupted themselves and others, and stock market gurus that illicitly bankrolled. I mean, do you think that your prowess to fund your racing came from your banking prowess and your ability to help people understand value of money? Because that's what it's all about when it comes to sponsorships, right? Yeah.
Well, taking your last point first, Mark, when I was racing, as a young professional, I wasn't in banking. In fact, I got my job in banking because I'd shown an ability. The guy who interviewed me, who was the senior partner of the firm I joined, said, you know nothing about business, you know nothing about banking or the stock markets, but you've shown a great ability to screw large amounts of money out of institutions. that was the way he put it, and he was right. So it was self-taught in that respect. My banking, lasted for 30 years up until I retired in 2010. So very early on, because I'd made sufficient to retire on, or I hoped I had anyway. But you're right. I mean, in those days, this was pre-social media and everything we have now. We only had terrestrial TV coverage of a few races in those days. So it was really about trying to sell the concept of and the value of sponsorship and applying that to motor racing. And, it's basically B2B, business to business selling. So that's what I learned about. But moving on to your earlier question about the stories in the book. First of all, you're right in saying that there are, actually, I can't remember how many chapters there are, 66 chapters, I think, in the book. So 66 true stories. There's actually more than that, because flicking through the book, there's another, I think, 27 sidebars. So some of them are one pages, some maybe half pages, of other people who've been involved in crime as well. And the other thing, before I move on to a couple of examples, so the point is there's an awful lot of stories in there, and I can talk you through a couple of examples for sure, which, without giving away the rest of the book, hopefully it'll be a teaser. But the one qualifier I should add before doing that is that there are people. This is about a book about people in motorsport who are involved in crime. So some of them are on the wrong side of crime. Some of them are absolutely, people may flick through the contents page and say, well, what did that guy do wrong, or what did that person do wrong? Some of them are victims of crime as opposed to criminals, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Scott Tucker, who's currently still in prison, although I believe is appealing that sentence once again. The Whittington brothers, very well known drug runners and entertaining characters, if that's the right way of describing them. And then Randy Lanier, who's been the subject, as Scott Tucker has actually, of Netflix documentaries. And Randy is one of these guys who I haven't spoken to, but is similar to a lot of people that I have interviewed in Europe who've done their time. Randy, I have to say, my job really, Mark, has not been, to be judgmental in any way. I've just written the facts as they are, and nor, conversely, have I tried to, condone what any of these people have done. Randy, ironically, because of the legislation that's changed with what you guys call narcotics, was in my view, was very unfairly given an extraordinarily long sentence. But he's come through it. He was released earlier than it was anticipated, but he's come through it, and he's one of these guys who I'm pretty, without putting words in his mouth, would say, well, I've done my time, and he's gone back to normal life, and is an upright citizen. In the same way that over here there was a well-known touring car driver and then became owner called Vic Lee. He ran a very well-known racing team in touring cars over here, and he, as you alluded earlier on, was ultimately found guilty of using his transporters for importing drugs, were sealed away in the oxyacetylene bottles in the truck.
Oh gosh!
This truck was going backwards and forwards to Holland to test at the Dutch circuit Zandvoort, and the truck, which is rather surprising because the racing team he ran was based very near Brands Hatch, so he already had a circuit very close at hand for testing. And the British Touring Car Championship, the clue's in the name, British. They never raced abroad. Yeah. So why would a British touring car team go and race in Holland, go and test in Holland when they've got a circuit around the corner? Right. And the sort of irony in that story was that they were busted by an eagle-eyed customs officer who happened to be a marshal, a trackside marshal,
okay,
and recognised this truck going backwards and forwards, and thought, what's going on here? Anyway, so that was the tip-off to the police. Vic Lee subsequently went to prison, served his time, came out, and was then caught again, not doing the same thing. Well, it was drugs-related, but was caught, should we say, aiding and abetting some drug-related transactions in a car park. He'd been tailed, which involved another touring car driver called Jerry Marnie, and they both ended up by going to prison. So that guy, Vic Lee, who's a lovely, lovely guy, I might add, was done twice and got 6 years, served 6 years on each occasion, and is now back in the sport as managing director for a company called Corbeau, who make racing seats, ironically.
Okay.
So, and he originally got that job when he was working on open release. He was we have open prisons over here for people who are deemed not to be violent or a danger to the public. And he was a prison, well-known open prison called Ford, not Ford America, but Ford with an E on the end. And he was on open release working for this company called Corbeau. And when he came out, long story short, he worked his way through the company, and as I say, is now the principal shareholder and managing director of it. So he
redeemed
he's
himself.
an interesting guy, but I was alluding to the similarity with someone like Randy Lanier. Both those guys, and Vic certainly said, yeah, well, I know people don't approve of drugs and narcotics and what it can do to young people, but, I've served my time. And he has. He served his time twice. And he is genuinely, very upright and respectable citizen. And that's what the prison system, I suppose, is designed to do, is to rehabilitate people.
Well, you would hope so.
But would you like me to give you a couple of other
Well,
examples?
yeah. One of the things, though, that I would like to ask you is, in putting this book together, especially since it's your first book, what were some of the challenges you faced? Because obviously, as you said, you're telling stories. You're not making judgment. You want to make sure these stories are accurate, first and foremost, because they involve criminal activity, and you don't want to accuse anybody of something they didn't do. So a lot of research and so forth. But what was one of the biggest challenges you faced in putting this book together?
I think one of the challenges was, so someone like just the guy I've just spoken about, Vic Lee, was getting him to talk to me, because most people who've been to prison are not very proud about it. If you've got a criminal conviction, it's not something to put on your CV exactly.
No.
So someone like Vic, it took a long time to get hold of. I tracked him down very quickly. Wasn't difficult to do that. I knew where he worked very easily. I sent him emails. I put a load of phone calls in. And bear in mind, this is predominantly done over the COVID lockdowns we had over here.
Right.
And I guess I knew why he wasn't taking my calls. I don't blame him for that. But I read a series of emails from which he obviously checked my name out. I made it very clear I wasn't I wasn't a journalist, and I was putting this book together as a first-time author. I gave him my credentials as an enthusiast, as a historic racer, and ultimately he took the call.
Do you think that helped a bit, being that you are a true racer, that there was some trust there?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, if I were in that position, I'd think, here comes another journalist trying to make up some story for one of those sort of
tabloid things.
Yeah, tabloid press newspapers we have over here. But the fact that he could see, and these days, of course, you can Google anybody and find out a lot about them. And he would have checked my name. He could see that I am an enthusiast, and I've raced historics for 30 odd years now, plus my original racing career. So I think that did open doors. Yes, it helped. It certainly opened doors. I mean, there are an awful lot of people, Mark, who Vic Lee gets a credit at the front of the book because he helped me. There are an awful lot of other people who helped me, but didn't want their names mentioned. So there's a much longer list than appears. But I guess that was my biggest hurdle. The other thing was fact checking, and the other hurdle, I think, for me in putting it together was that I wanted to put the crimes in context of motor racing without giving too much Anarchy type detail on racing. And I think there are a couple of chapters, I'm not going to mention which they are, but I think there are a couple of chapters where perhaps I've given too much information on cars or motor racing. And bear in mind, the main readership, the main demographic for this book is going to be the sort of people who are, you're talking to and are listening to your shows. Having said that, there's very definitely another demographic who is more interested, whose primary sport may not be motor racing, but who are just interested in the crime. So it's trying to get the balance to interest not just motor racing aficionados, but also people, the more casual reader.
Well, I'll remind you, listeners, it's a long book and it's fun, 480 pages, which I would consider, full of cool stories. And it's the kind of book I like, where there's all these short stories that you can jump into and get excited about and learn about. And certainly learned a lot of things going through this. 90 photos, most of them are in color. Really a cool book. And it would be a fun book for you also to share with your cohorts who love automobiles as a gift. I love giving books as gifts. So there you go. I like to ask my guests about one special vehicle in their life. And this may be hard for you, Crispian, because you've driven so many cool cars. But when we think about racing, what's one car you've raced that just tugs at your heart?
The racing car, the competition car I'm most fond of is one of the ones I still have at home in my garage, and I still race very regularly. And that's a Cooper T56.
Ooh, nice.
It is a Formula Junior. It is. We were talking about safety and the structure of these things earlier on. It's a tubular chassis car, but it's stronger than a lot of other cars. And it's a beautifully balanced little car. It's a very famous car. Its sister car is sitting in the States at the moment with Bruce. Is it Canepa?
Oh, Canepa. Oh, yeah, Bruce. Okay. I know of that car. Yeah.
Well, Bruce has the sister car, which I think is for sale. And Bruce and I have had dialogue about this, but our cars were both, there were two of the three works Coopers run by the Tyrrell organization. Tyrrell went on, of course, to become a Formula One entrant, and with whom he won 3 world championships with Jackie Stewart. But these two cars were some of the earliest cars that Tyrrell ran, and between them they won the championship and virtually all races with Tony Mads and another driver. What no one knows, the third car, which is owned by a friend of mine, we know that won one specific race, but what no one knows, despite what Bruce might say, is which of the two chassis, mine or his, won which races. But we know that between them they won an awful lot. What Bruce's car has that mine doesn't have is the fact that it was sold to somebody called Steve McQueen.
Oh, that guy.
That guy, and therefore it has a huge premium on it, and is worth more than my car. But they're both worth quite a lot of money. And the reason it's special to me, I guess, is because partly because of the success I've had in it. I've won the class championship in it several times since I've owned it, and I won not only the class championship, became second in the overall Lorani series, which is a very prestigious series in Europe in 2019. And I won races outright in it on some of the classic European circuits. So that's one I'm probably fondest of, and it's for me, for my build against all the other cars I own and I've driven. It's literally like putting on a very comfortable suit. It really fits me, or I fit it, whichever way you look at it. So
1961, that car, right?
it is indeed, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, beautiful car. I love it. So I'm going to be your car psychologist today, Crispian. I'm going to crawl into your head a little bit here. If you were reincarnated as a vehicle, what would you be and why?
I think I would be. I've got a Land Rover Defender, which is probably about 18 years old now, and I think I'd be that because they're very strong, they're dependable, they're reliable. Strangely, there's very little electronics to go wrong in them. They're practical, and if I can say it on your show, that there's no bullshit about them.
They do what they're supposed to do. Yeah. Yeah. Why am I not surprised? That makes sense for a Brit like you. Well,
and they're Brit.
Yeah. Well, of course. I always, ask guests about books, but of course, today, again, we're focused on Driven to Crime, True Stories of Wrongdoings in Motor Racing by my guest today, Crispian Besley, by our friends, published by our friends at EVRO. They brought a lot of great books and a lot of great people to this show. So I'm going to enable you to do something pretty fun today. I'm going to be your benefactor. You don't have to do anything illegal to go on this drive, because I'm going to provide it to you. Not that you would, of course. I'm going to put your seat in any race car, any vintage car, newer car, whatever you want to drive. I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to let you go to any track in the country. And typically I allow people to take somebody with them. Now, you're a single-seater guy, so that's not going to work in a car, but you can take anybody with you, maybe as a driving coach or somebody to talk to. What does that magical drive look like for you?
Okay, well, I think I'll answer the question in two ways. So if I was going, I can't drive my race car to the circuit because it's a single-seater.
Right.
So I would drive to that circuit as opposed to fly or bicycle or whatever, and I would I would drive to the circuit, I think, Mark, in a Porsche 911.
Nice.
Not necessarily the current generation. I'm a historic or a vintage racer, so I'm very old-fashioned, and I love stick shift. All my cars are stick shift as opposed to auto.
Yeah. So
I'd go in probably one of the cars I sold, which was a Porsche 997 4S, so four-wheel drive, wide-bodied, and it's one of the best balanced and most perfect cars I've ever owned or driven.
Nice.
As my passenger, I would take my girlfriend, and I'd probably share the driving with her. And I would go, bear in mind I live where I do in the UK, I would go to one of my favourite circuits, probably would be Goodwood, actually. But if I was being adventurous, a better drive would be through France down to Monaco. So one of those two circuits,
Okay.
At which I would then drive my single-seater, probably my Cooper. But I've raced also Oscars, which are like little baby Maseratis at both those circuits.
Oh, nice.
And the person that I would have there who I'd share, my girlfriend would be on the sidelines, I guess, watching and cheering me on, hopefully. But I'd share everything else with the guy who prepares my cars and is my mechanic when I'm at the circuit. He's a guy called Chris Beaumont, who is a very, very blunt Kiwi who we get on with each other very, very well. We don't have to communicate with many words. He knows what I want from a car, and he knows I can't translate what I want to the car without him. So we work very well together.
Sounds like a magical trip. And being a guy who loves Porsche 911s like I do, you're a man after my own heart. Love those cars.
Good.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. You've taken us on a magical ride, but listeners, more importantly, get your hands on this book, Driven to Crime, because it will take you on a very intriguing ride into perhaps the darker side of racing, but people's characters and why they do things and what they've done. This book is full of a lot of surprises, a lot of things I didn't know about from the past. Some of them I had, but a lot of them I didn't. So get your hands on this book. And I want to, before I ask you for some parting words of advice and wisdom, I want to do a shout out to our mutual friend, Judy Stropus. I mean, Judy just keeps bringing me awesome people. And Judy she's so well known. Everybody knows Judy. So Judy, thank you for bringing me another winner here today with Crispian. This has really, really been cool. I could talk to you for hours. Could you leave us with some parting words of wisdom or advice that maybe writing this book has taught you?
I'd probably say never give up, and if at first you don't succeed, keep on trying, because that's what I've had to do in different facets of my life, and that includes writing a book for the first and probably the last time.
Well, nicely done. It's funny. I've interviewed hundreds of race car drivers, every one of them, and I was wondering if you were going to say it. That's the quote they give: never give up. And of course, being a Brit, that applies to a man that was in the history of the UK, of course, Sir Winston Churchill. Never, ever give up. So yeah, or when you're racing, as he said, marching through hell, just keep on going. Right?
Absolutely.
That's what he said. Well, this has been a wonderful talk, and I can't thank you enough for spending some time with me today. As I said, we could talk for hours. I got to get over there to Goodwood. Maybe I can have you show me around the track there. That would be pretty darn fun one of these days.
I'd love to.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Well, Crispian, thank you for being so generous today with your time and your expertise and sharing this wonderful new book. Well done, my friend. For a first book, bravo. Very well done. Until you and I talk again, I'll see you down the road.
Thanks, Mark.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's ride here at Cars Yeah. Drive on over to carsyeah.com to find show notes and inspiring automotive fun. Download your free copy of Filler Up, a fun book filled with gorgeous photographs of fuel filler fun, including quotes from more inspiring automotive enthusiasts. Download your copy today, and we'll see you next time on Cars Yeah.